Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Housing and Community Safety Policy and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome members and officers and guests. So if we could begin by asking members if they have any declarations of interest. No? Okay, thank you. Next agenda item is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of October 2022. Do any members have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No. Okay, happy for me to sign those. Thank you very much. Before we get into public participation, members will have noticed that there was an agenda supplement published for an item which we're going to take under urgent business. So this relates to something that's happened fairly recently following the tragic death of a young child in Rochdale, which many of us will have seen on the news. Following that, the regulator of social housing has written to all registered social housing providers, including local authorities, seeking assurance on addressing issues relating to damp and mould. And the deadline for those responses is the 19th of December. So we'll take the opportunity this evening for officers to give us an update on how the council proposes to respond to that. I propose to take that item under urgent business after item 4 on the agenda. So after housing support around cost of living increases and before the Q2 monitor, if members are happy with that. Okay. That moves us on to public participation. I'm pleased to say we have 2 registered participants today, one in person, Councillor Bob Webb, and one participant remotely, Hilary Platt. So if I can ask Councillor Webb to join us at the table, please. You'll know the score. You'll have 3 minutes, and if start by telling us which agenda item your remarks relate to, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on the item you've just mentioned about damp and mould. So firstly, let me acknowledge why this has been put on the agenda. As the Chair has, an inquest found that a 2-year-old Awab Ishak died as a result of severe respiratory condition caused by prolonged exposure to mould in his home in Rochdale. My thoughts are with Awab and his family. Chair, along with Councillor Perrott and Councillor Douglas, I have the privilege of representing Heworth Ward, and our ward contains a high proportion of the city's social housing. I'm very proud of that fact. We have the flats on Eastern Terrace and Wood Street, properties on Dodsworth Ave, Pottery Lane, Foss Ways, Byland, Monkton Road, Bell Farm Estates, and of course the original homes for heroes built after the First World War in Tang Hall. Our residents live and work in York, and I'm proud that we can provide them with a home. Members of this committee will know that our tenants pay their rent and put up with a lot from the council. Our tenants are some of the most vulnerable people in our city due to the inequalities they face, but they pay their rent and keep on going, at times, despite poor service. The regulator of social housing has asked for assurances that this council is addressing risks related to damp and mould in tenants' homes. Let me be crystal clear on 2 points. In York, this problem is not being dealt with. In York, Lib Dem Green administration have been tactically ignoring this problem in favour of pet projects elsewhere. Genuinely, housing officers have had to go and tell tenants not to pack up for temporary moves and to unpack boxes again because a decision has been taken to stop repairs on their homes. Councillor Perrott asked a question about this situation at a meeting of full council in July to get the executive member for housing, Denise Craggill, to shine a light on what's going on. Councillor Craggill claimed she knew nothing. Surely it must have been her decision or that of housing officers. Surely she should have been aware of the distress these decisions were causing tenants. When the capital projects team visited Bell Farm Ave, they used a damp meter on the walls. This device measures percentage saturation and should usually read around 4%. It read 50%. There's a 10-year gap in life expectancy between the most affluent and least well-off in York. Cold, damp housing is a major contributing risk factor to health, and it's clear that the administration doesn't have York's residents' health needs in mind. So committee, please, if you hear from the executive member tonight, it'd be nice, or from officers, don't worry that you know, they think they've got it all in hand, everything will be fine, we've got a plan. Remember, that's not the case. People are suffering in York right now. So please hold the administration to account and challenge them to invest in protecting our tenants and to help to stop the problem getting worse. And finally, if I may, regarding my own wards, I'd particularly like to know the numbers of properties in need of work on the Bell Farm estate and the timeline that we're going to follow to get these problems solved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Webb. I'm sure the issues you've picked up, we will pick up with officers when we get to that agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So our next public speaker is Hilary Platt. Can you hear me, Hilary?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
We can, loud and clear. Welcome. So I'm assuming you're speaking on the same subject, damp and mould, as Councillor Webb.
I am, yes. I'm actually the chair of the Bell Farm Community Association, which is the Residents Association in Bell Farm.
Okay.
So good evening.
Thank you. Over to you. You can start your 3 minutes whenever you're ready.
Right, thank you. As I said, good evening. Originally, this was a Bell Farm BCA issue that I was bringing up, but we have seen that it's across York. And I did send the following email to Dennis Southall and Councillor Cragg. Now, Dennis Southall did actually respond and said that once all managers had come up with responses, he would be in touch. However, we've had no reply whatsoever from Councillor Craghill. In the wake of the tragic death of our Ishwak, which is very sad, and my condolences go out to their family, and the recommendations from central government through letters from Michael Gove, we at the BCA are asking what urgent action is being taken to the black mould that many houses are suffering in Bell Farm and across York. The standing water project has been halted, leaving many, including myself, with black mould in our homes. With the increase in utility costs, many will not be in a position to be putting the heating on through the winter, which could make matters even worse than they currently are. And we are very worried about this. We asked, will York Council looking to reinstate and bring forward the essential standing water work that will treat and alleviate many of the mould problems council homes across York have? And also window work, which again has been delayed, some in Bell Farm waiting an extra 5 years already, and that will make a massive difference to many homes staying warm and dry. We also asked, will CYC, City of York Council, be looking at an emergency mould team that can act quickly in an emergency situation? We think this is needed for both private and rentals and social housing. It is a worry to many that we would like to put minds at rest. People are worried about their children and not being put at risk of death by the housing situation. Obviously, the news has made things worse, so we do want to alleviate those worries. What I will say though is I have been told in the last day or so that a complaint was dealt with very quickly in Byland Avenue, which is part of Bell Farm. And it was reported 2 weeks ago that there was mould. They did go out, they did treat it, and they put a new fan in. But what I will say is this house has already been treated for standing water. So for that house to be treated before others that haven't and have worse mould isn't that good. But also, without a clear idea of what people need to do to get the houses treated, how will anybody know? How will anybody know that they have to report it again? We don't know whether we should go out and clean the mould because we're told that it's dangerous. So we need a plan and we need something quickly. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hilary. And again, actually, officers have been making a note during your 3 minutes. I'm sure we'll pick up some of those points when we get to that agenda item. Thank you very much. Okay. Actually, the executive member has arrived. Welcome. You're quite welcome to join us the table if you'd like to. If you sit over there, that'd be fine. Okay, that brings us on to agenda item 4, which is update on support for council tenants through the impacts of the cost of living increases. Dennis, are you going to introduce this one?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And if you'd like to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, I'm Dennis Southall. I'm Head of Housing Management for City of York Council Housing Services, responsible for the management of the council's housing stock, homelessness services, including roof slates, and a few other things as well, which I won't go into right now. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've read the paper that I've put before you. I'm just going to summarise it because hopefully it's fairly straightforward. As I've outlined, our residents have had a tough time for some considerable time. On the back of many years of austerity, we've had a number of world events which have affected the global economy, and that's combined with the COVID pandemic and the impact of that, along with the cost of living increase now, brings us to a point of perfect storm, really, I would say. I've outlined the standard mechanisms that are in place to ensure that all residents get fair treatment when they do get into debt, and in particular for us here, rent arrears. I have outlined the arrears position at the moment, and I've also gone through some of the help that housing staff help deliver to all of those tenants that they get into discussions with. So we have a proactive approach to rent arrears collection, which is based on supporting people. Unfortunately, there is an escalation process, as we call it, wherein if arrears do increase or people simply don't respond to our offers of help and support, we do have a duty to the wider community of tenants to do something about it, and unfortunately that can very occasionally lead through into ultimately eviction. You'll see the numbers, despite the difficulties that we've had around income and arrears over the last few number of years, is very low at 4. Each eviction is unfortunate, and it very much is a last resort. It's not the council's decision, it's a decision of the county court. Just to remind you of that. We can apply, but a judge makes a decision based on the evidence before them. I've also included as attachments a number of the tools and forms that my teams use to make sure that everybody is aware of the help that's available, whether that comes nationally, locally, and indeed wider support such as local area coordination, etc. I've also given you a bit of context for the finances of the housing revenue account, because you'll all be aware that the council generally isn't immune to the cost of living pressures that we see, and that's having a very major impact on our finances. So we need to view the work that we do generally in that context. I'll stop at that point because I think I've covered the main issues that I wanted to highlight. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Dennis. And it was very helpful to have all the annexes as well in terms of I suppose a reminder of the information that is available. Obviously, that will be more relevant for some than others, but it's useful to see the information that members of staff do have. So it's open to members, really. I suppose you're starting with the numbers. Obviously, paragraph 8 in the table shows a continuing increase in the arrears position. I just wondered if, just kind of unpacking that slightly, are we seeing an increased number of we're seeing an increased number of tenants in arrears, but are we seeing some tenants whose arrears are not are just exponentially growing, and obviously new tenants finding themselves in arrears? What's the kind of churn in terms of tenants finding themselves in arrears and other tenants being able to get up to date again?
Okay, so I haven't brought you any breakdowns in sort of levels of arrears and number of tenants and trends over time, but I can supply that if that would be helpful to members. In answer to your question, there is an increase at all levels. As you can see, the numbers have risen steadily, and the number of accounts in arrears have risen steadily. I will say that the October figure was actually a decrease on the September figure. So the September figure was over 1.8 million, and there was a decrease in that. I'm hoping that trend will continue as we roll out the extensive work that I've detailed in the report that the teams are doing around rent arrears, the dedicated time, the extra training and support for residents. We have had a number of people who, whilst our ability to take action during the COVID period and beyond have unfortunately not engaged with the help that we've given them, and their arrears have skyrocketed. Now we continue to plug away trying to get them engaged and get that support regardless of the level of their arrears, but some of them have risen quite substantially. So we have seen a spike in some of those arrears. However, the intensive work that the team is doing, and as I've said, we did see an increase over the last month. We haven't got figures for November yet, obviously. Indicates that there may be some encouragement within the overall picture. Yeah. Arrears work, in my experience, and I've dealt with them for about 30 years now, is that they're like turning a super tanker. But the work you put in now really comes through 3 months down the line, and obviously we've been working hard on this over the last few months. I did detail the implementation of the new IT system, which has not been without its teething issues. We're getting on top of those now and really getting stuck in to some of the work that we need to do around this area. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's yes, intriguing from what you're saying in terms of it. It is across all levels. It's not just particular spikes in certain areas. Thank you.
If I can just add on,
yes,
in terms of the root causes of that increase over that time period, you've got some big global economic events underpinning that, including COVID, and then the current energy costs, inflationary increases to just about everything underpinning that particular time period. We've also got an ongoing switch of some residents onto universal credit, which increases the level of arrears that local authorities are suffering, because the payment for the housing element of their benefits goes directly to them rather than directly to the council, and that has meant that it gets caught up in bigger domestic budgeting issues and becomes a choice about what gets paid.
Just briefly on that, so the paragraph 9 sets out the arrears 1.294 in relation to universal credit claimants. Is that a subset of the 1.794? So I wasn't entirely clear.
Yes, it is, Chair.
It is,
yes,
yeah.
that's just
That's
extrapolating universal credit claimants. Yeah.
Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you, Chair. Just on that topic, Tracy. You say that the housing element of UC goes to the claimant rather than to the council. Is there scope to say that it can be paid direct to the local authority?
The default position is that it's paid to to the tenant.
No, I appreciate that's the default, but if people are in arrears, for example, can you get future payments made direct to the authority?
Yes, if you look at paragraph 11,
Yeah.
I've sort of detailed the circumstances under which we can do that. If we can demonstrate, and in addition, if we can demonstrate that somebody is particularly vulnerable and needs their payments paid directly to prevent them being in danger of losing their tenancy, there is the ability to apply for that. But that obviously doesn't apply to anybody, and it has a certain threshold as well for the DWP.
That's useful. I've got a couple more.
Yeah,
That's
carry
okay. And you rightly say that there's only 4 people this year that have been evicted through non-payment of rent, but there are 532 cases that are within the legal process. Now, when you say within a legal process, what does that actually mean? And does that mean 532 people are likely to go to court? I suspect not, but if you could explain and go into a little bit more clarity as to whether we're going to see a spike of court cases and evictions in a couple of months' time.
The answer to that last bit is no. What I mean by in the court system is that they have a court order against them, or we're applying for a court order. Now, some of those court orders can be very, very old. They could be the statute of limitations generally works for 6 years, but court orders can remain in place against somebody for some considerable time. So they're not cases that we've just applied for now recently. That includes all the historic cases that we have on court orders as well.
So can I just ask how many current cases, given the current cost of living crisis and given the current level of increase in rent arrears?
Yeah, I don't have that information with me. Again, I can find that out.
Yeah.
Of that, I can find the subset. For example, in the last year or so.
Yes,
like that.
yes, something like that. That would be that would be incredibly helpful. And then you go out very helpfully in the report to sort of outline the support packages that are available for when somebody goes into arrears. The process seems to have kicked in at a relatively early stage. Though I'm a bit concerned, you said this is only a few weeks old. When did this level package of support really start to be developed in the way that it has done?
Okay, so when I say that, I don't mean that this has suddenly kicked in. All of the basics have been there for years. That the pre-court protocol, for example, has been in existence for at least 5 or 6 years that I can remember, probably a lot longer than that. And we've complied with that all the way through and gone above and beyond that. It's a standard part of the housing management officer's role and our support staff's role to tackle income issues, which is part of making sure that people are safe and stable in their homes. So we do that from day one on cases. What I was talking about when I said indicated things have kicked in more recently was the making sure that people are having dedicated time of at least a day a week set aside for those arrears. Previously, we've offered a more flexible system. As you know, the housing management role is very diverse to deal with a whole range of issues. So we've allowed them to manage their own diaries. What we've specifically focused on is them setting aside at least a day a week, 2 half days, full day, but making sure from a management point of view that is happening, and providing the support, making sure that the support is there around training from their team leaders, getting direction on cases, making sure that they feel that they have the skills to help the people out there.
That's just what I was going to ask you that. Sorry, Tracy, do you want to chip in?
Well, it's just to give some context to that. We come from a situation during COVID when recovery activity was ceased and was not possible. to a position where you move then into a cost of living crisis where recovery activity becomes more sophisticated and difficult. Hence our change in tack in terms of how we're applying our resources to consistently approach that issue. It's not like normal life happened and then we've got a cost of living crisis. We came from a very low base in terms of activity that was ongoing through that long period of lockdowns and COVID restrictions.
Yeah, and so just on both of those points, you talk about making sure that the staff are the HMOs, the housing management officers, are sufficiently trained. Is that trained in debt work? Is that trained in engaging with people that may not want to engage, working with vulnerable people, specifically around the debt issues?
Yeah, it's a whole range of training around those issues, and importantly the IT system as well. So it's still relatively new to us all. It's the core of our collection because it flags up who's going into arrears, who needs help, as well as the local knowledge and relationships that the HMOs have. So yes, there is technical training around using the IT system, making sure it's used efficiently. Those skills around negotiating, engaging with people, and also welfare benefits. Now, they're not debt advisors, not welfare benefit advisors, but they're very, very good at signposting.
But they can put people into that.
To people who are, and using those tools that I've set out there, which are, I think they're great. We're part of that Advice York network that has developed those tools. They're very comprehensive, and the team are very adept at sort of engaging our residents in those conversations around that, and obviously everything else that they want to talk about as well.
And I've managed our debt recovery teams for council tax business rates in the past. There is a specific to housing rent recovery that is slightly more nuanced, and that's how it relates to tenancy maintenance and the legal restrictions and constraints around some of the actions you might take as part of rent recovery. It's just that bit more complicated, which is why we retained it as a specialist function within the housing team.
Okay, thank you. Got some more members wanting to come in. Councillor Bassey, please to give in.
Thank you, Chair. So to start with, I have to say there were two figures here that I couldn't see, and it may be just me, but made it hard for me to understand. Obviously, the arrears are very serious for the council, as they are for tenants, and because of the cost of living crisis and everything else. The first figure I couldn't see was you list the number of accounts in arrears, but there isn't a figure for the number of accounts that I could see. So I wasn't able to understand what percentage of the total number of accounts are in arrears. If you could answer that one first, that would help.
Yes, we have just short of 7,500 rent accounts.
Thank you.
For council properties, and then about 280 13 group properties that we manage for that organisation.
Thank you. So that was the first thing. The second thing I couldn't find was any sense of what the average rent is for a council tenant. And the reason why that mattered to me while I was trying to make sense of all of this was we get in paragraph 10, there's a £406.51 average arrears figure. But without an understanding of an average figure for what people pay a week, it's very hard to get a sense of how many week in arrears people are at this moment in time.
So from memory, the average rent is in the low 80s. I'm looking at so low to mid 80s. That's an average, obviously, per week. Yeah.
Right. So in terms of to make sure I've understood all of this, then since around half, slightly less than half of people are in arrears, and given the figures you've spoken about, am I right to then draw from that the number of weeks people are in arrears can be 10, 11, 12 weeks? Is that how we come to these figures?
I think that's a bit of a simplistic approach to understanding them. Again, I haven't put a lot of detail in the report, but I do have a lot of detail. The short answer of that, we will have some accounts which are in the thousands, so they will be quite a high number of weeks in, and other accounts that range throughout the levels of arrears. Generally, it's skewed towards the lower end, but obviously, if you get a few accounts which are really high, it does push that figure up. That doesn't really answer your question in any meaningful detail, and without having the figures in front of you, it's difficult to describe it.
It's one of those situations where averages probably skew the reality of what's really going on, because it's the aged debt profile is going to be much more complicated than that.
Okay.
The reason I'm asking is I'd like to get a sense of how many people there are that we can help before they fall too far, to get a sense of the curve of this problem for the council and for the tenants, to get a sense of how we can address it. Where's the problem that, where are the pinch points? Where are the areas we can address before things get worse? I suppose is what I'm saying with that. So I would like, if it's possible, Chair, that we could receive those figures or get a sense of those figures in the weeks ahead, so that we have a clearer picture of what people pay, how long people are in debt, all those figures, so that we can be more informed.
Yeah, I think, to be fair to officers, we asked for a report on steps to help tenants who are faced with a number of challenges. So to be fair to Dennis, we didn't ask for a detailed breakdown of the arrears position, but that's I think those questions are entirely valid in terms of so the key intervention points that potentially can have maximum impact in terms of preventing a bad situation from becoming worse. So I think that's a legitimate ask. I think you had a supplementary question, Councillor.
I did. I just whispered it to the chair. I remember a previous conversation that we'd had when we were looking at, I think, one of the performance monitors, and we were looking at the debt situation. And there was an issue with universal credit, and given that you've referenced it, about the delay from claim to payment, which was then putting people into some quite significant arrears, but then that payment then being backdated. Is that becoming a lesser or greater problem now than it was a year or so ago, when I think we last discussed it? Probably longer than a year, actually.
Yeah, it's less of a problem now. The performance of the DWP has improved over time. Obviously, we've got a lot more people on universal credit now, and if excuse me, Chair. Right. It's all these numbers sticking in my throat. Yeah, and universal credit is paid 4 weeks in arrears, which is the difference from the housing benefit that we used to get data loaded each week from our own housing benefit department. So we've got a lot less people on housing benefit, a lot more people on universal credit. So we actually have arrears baked in to those figures that you see. The more people that are on universal credit, the more people that are paid 4 weeks in arrears. And it tends to be the case that people are not in a position to be able to make up those 4 weeks and pay in advance, which is what their tenancy agreement says. Technically, that's what they're supposed to do.
So a lot of this, not a lot, but a proportion of this debt figure is around the fact that a lot of people will be starting out with 4 weeks in arrears from when they do their claim.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you for clarifying that. Is that a supplementary, Councillor Vassie? Okay, I'll put you back on the list. Councillor Wells is next.
Thank you. My actual points
fit in with both of the issues that we've already done. With regards to giving housing management officers a day a week, what is happening to the other 4/5 of their role? What I'm really wanting to know is more about the support that we've got for the officers, because if they're dealing with debt, the chances are that the people in debt have mental health problems as well, because debt just adds to all your problems. And so if they're dealing with that on a constant level, what support is there for them?
So obviously the housing management officers deal with a whole range of issues. Arrears is just one of them, because they do have a generic role. As I've indicated, there is dedicated support from the housing team leaders who, you know, all of them have a lot of experience of all being housing management officers themselves, and they provide regular supervision, they provide guidance, and they'll talk through specific cases. And as Tracy mentioned earlier, that's why debt around housing issues is really quite a specialist area. And what the approach that we take is a holistic approach. So we don't go in and say, I want my rent. You know, we look at the whole family situation and we make appropriate referrals around that. You know, for example, there may be a care leaver, a young person experienced with care. So we'll take that into account as well. And we've been developing our policies specifically around that, and the support and training that we provide to staff specifically around those areas. So just to reiterate, the housing management officers are very adept at dealing with a whole range of issues, be it from physical health issues, mental health issues, you know, different ethnicities, all of those sorts of issues. That's their day job, as it were. The setting aside of time will eat into other things, but will also give them a little bit of structure around that as well. And you can guarantee when they're talking to somebody about rent and arrears, they'll be talking about a whole range of issues, such as the repairs, any repairs that they're outstanding, you know, any help that they need in other areas, for example, whether it's emotional, psychological support, financial, or whether they've got an issue with the neighbour or something like that. So it's part of the work. It's about giving a dedicated focus, a bit of space for them to really tackle those areas. But it melds into the general work that the housing management officers do.
So is that a follow-up? Yeah.
It's just a point of clarity on the work that they're doing in that dedicated time, the income reviews. Is that a piece of work with the tenant then face to face or on the phone? It's not a desk job. I think I've detailed in there. What we try and do is make the contact in the way that person wants. So yes, we could sit and we could have staff sat in an office all day making phone calls, and that would be more efficient than going out and knocking on doors. But we offer a full range of approaches. So some people will be happy with a video call or even a text. The relationships that the HMOs build up with the residents that live in an area, they'll use that information. There is a formal part of the process, so we will send the letters. We have to under the pre-court protocol. But around that, they will use their local knowledge and the knowledge that we have on our IT system to engage with people in an appropriate manner. Because everybody's different, so they will tailor as far as they can the approach that they take.
Okay. Thank you. Did you have any follow-up, Councillor Wells? No. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Yes. Linked into this, really, housing management officers have an extremely difficult job. I think all ward councillors know that, and we all work very closely with them. Certainly in the Guildhall ward, Councillor Crackhill would agree that they've certainly got very difficult work going on in some of our properties there. At the last meeting, and in the report we had last time, reference was made to the local area coordinators and the role that they play in support of the work going on. And my concern that I raised at that time And in fact, Neil Ferris was here and I put the question to him. He didn't give me the answer to that. I said, if it were to be considered in budgetary terms for any political party to look to the future, would it be possibly the case that LACs might be more vulnerable than anybody else? And the reason why I'm saying that is, as elected members, sometimes it's very difficult to get exact feedback from the work that they are doing. So the question behind all of that is, would the housing management officers in any particular area keep records of work that the LACs are doing with them, whatever that could be given to Joe McHaley or whatever the team? Is that data that could be available? Because it's a little bit nebulous, really. I feel that the work they do excellent work, the LACs, but it's very hard to pin down how exactly that fits in with the housing management officer. And given that the situation is getting harder for housing management officers, what is that relationship? And should the reliance still be on LACs when in fact, who knows?
Who'd like to pick that one?
Yeah, I can answer that. It'd be nigh and impossible to be able to provide that level of information. The number of interactions that we have on cases. What I do know is that the local area coordination service is very good at recording the work that they do. I attend the management board meetings, so I would ask the service to provide that information, and within those meetings they always give some detailed examples of some of the impacts that the staff have had, whether they be with work with people who live in council homes or in the more general population. But that it isn't something that we record that we've recorded in a specific field to be able to pull that information out, if that makes sense.
Okay. Can I just add to that by saying, in a sense, they don't do themselves any favours, or the Joe and his team, because there is no mechanism for scrutiny, as far as I can see. They don't actually report directly in any sort of way, not to us or to any other. So maybe that could be something we might want to look at, because I know they offer a valuable service, and it would be nice to see something that's slightly more measurable, possibly. And just a very naive last question, I suppose. At the very end of the day, if somebody's evicted, okay, and that clearly is very limited in number, thankfully. What exactly is the responsibility of the local authority to somebody who has been evicted? What is our duty of care and well-being to our residents in the city if they find themselves in that position?
As with anybody who finds them, well, I'll take a step back. If somebody is threatened with homelessness, that we would obviously engage them with the housing options team to receive advice and support around preventing that. Obviously, the housing options team would look at their personal circumstances, but it's under the Homelessness Reduction Act, so there's a separate piece of legislation to look at those cases individually. Just because it's somebody who's lived in a council home, it doesn't make it any different. But obviously, what I would expect to see as manager of both services is all of the emphasis on prevention. So generally, when a case gets to an eviction, it means that we have tried absolutely everything time and time again. And just again to reiterate, it's not the council's decision to evict somebody; it's a judge based on the evidence that we put before them. And I can confirm that judges are very, very reluctant in the middle of a cost of living crisis on the back of the last 10 or 12 years and everything that's gone on to evict people, particularly where they have vulnerabilities as well. So hopefully that answers your question.
Well, what would happen then if all that happened, and would they be out on the street is what I'm asking, basically?
Generally, somebody will be given relief duty under the Homeless Reduction Act, so they would be provided with temporary accommodation while their case was fully investigated and a formal decision made on it. And at that point, they may be found intentionally homeless, as it's known, and asked to leave that accommodation. But even then, we have provision within our policies to be able to help them out, whether it's housing advice and getting something in the private rental sector. We have specific officers to help people do that. They may actually be excluded depending on the reason for their eviction. Not usually for rent arrears, but if they've been evicted for antisocial behaviour, for example, they may actually exclude themselves from that. But they will continue to receive full help and support. But at the end of the day, if they're found to be intentionally homeless, the authority wouldn't have a duty to accept them formally as homeless. They would have an appeal against that decision, and they would continue to receive help, advice and support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. It's a follow-up from Councillor Fitzpatrick's point about the role of the local area coordinators. In paragraph 21, you say that they are currently administering another fund to follow on from the hardship fund. So I was just wondering, how does that fund work? Is it discretionary, and do the local area coordinators have the sufficient training, sort of to the level of, you were saying that the HMOs have a high level of training on income and debt issues, or are the local area coordinators sort of just left to do that? Is it quite simple or not? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't actually manage the service, so I can't answer in any detail, but I do know the local area coordinator team intimately, and we do a lot of work with them. So they're generally very adept at walking alongside people to get them where they need to be, and that will involve engaging them with the appropriate services, whether it's debt advice or housing management. The fund that you're talking about there was housing revenue account money, which we contributed to in a wider fund around early intervention, which the LACs, the local area coordinators, were administering. Because their workloads are so high at the moment, we've taken it back to use as part of our hardship fund for the remainder of the year. So it'll be going direct. It was always spent. That portion was always spent on housing tenants because it's housing revenue account money. But we've got it back to administer as part of our hardship fund.
Thank you. Councillor Bassey.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions about energy. So the first relates to paragraphs 22 and 31. And it's about how we work to target energy saving advice and make changes within properties. I have to say I'm really disappointed to see that we've spent £343 on bulbs when the scale of the problem is so vast. I recognise immediately that staff are overworked and struggling to progress these things. But over the past 2 years, I've raised repeatedly the example of what the Caritas programs does in Germany, and how the voluntary sector in Germany helps to reach tenants directly and to immediately implement changes. So people who themselves have struggled to pay their bills, are struggling to pay their water bills or their electricity bills, are visited by someone who has been in exactly the same condition, in the same position, and has been trained to act as an energy and water ambassador for the city. They arrive with a big suitcase full of light bulbs and ways to reduce the amount of water coming out of taps, etc., and work directly with tenants to help put those in place, those measures there and then. And it frustrates me that 2 years later, I'm still hearing that we've managed to spend £343 on bulbs, because that's just 300 bulbs. And this is we've got 7,500 tenants. So my first question is, have we tried to engage the voluntary sector to look at things like Caritas, to get others to help us make these changes to help tenants? Because it frustrates me and saddens me to think that there be all these properties with basic things like that still undone because we're struggling at a council level. So my first question is, are we doing something along those lines? Have we done something? Are there plans to do something?
Tracy.
Can I just refer you to the earlier in that paragraph 31, where it talks about the plan that we're currently implementing to put in some quick win interventions over the next 6 months to help residents with energy efficiency and staying warm, which is to apply 60,000 of our HRA funding to create a post to do exactly that, to actually tour around and do the simple stuff and help with the low-hanging fruit. So we may have only spent £343 on light bulbs, but we did listen to you at the when you just came up with the idea at the last scrutiny meeting and have actually implemented it.
So something is directly being done now to bring in that. Well, that's a great relief to hear. Thank you.
Next question.
My second question relates to service charges, and again, I mean, we're all familiar with what's going on here because we're all suffering the same stuff in different ways. But when we read in paragraph 27 of the electricity bills in communal areas going up from £166 to £464 and gas going up from £288 to £2,000, I'm left wondering, I mean, we're all firefighting and trying to deal with the immediate problems that we're facing. And I'm left there wondering, what are there funding streams that we could be petitioning government about to manage energy efficiency measures in communal areas? And are there things that the politicians could be doing to help officers make sure that we make more noise to address those things? Because I also think, because we're going to be talking a damp and mold later, that surely in a building where there are communal areas, making sure that we ensure that we are keeping the heat going in those communal areas has a part to play, surely in mitigating and relieving problems with mold and damp. So just keen to get a sense of what you think we can do in the big scheme of things to get the funding to insulate communal areas, essentially, to make them more energy efficient.
I'll wait to be contradicted by any of my colleagues, but I'm not aware that there are any funding streams that target that. It's such a kind of a unique proposition. I think if we look at what the government has done around provision of support for utilities costs, it has taken it quite some time to wake up to the fact that people have got meters or might not have their energy costs broken out of their rental or service charges. They have today responded to that with an intention to provide support for all residents of independent living communities or hostels where that element might be actually bundled up into a broader service charge. That is now going to be changed, and they will be able to be eligible for further support for £400 voucher towards the utilities element of their costs. Problem we've got in our independent living communities is that the actual cost of that is not being currently passed on. So in a way that cost is being met by a broader number of tenants, not of that particular unit. So we have to address that in terms of how we deal with service charges, and that is under consideration for the future. In terms of the driver for investment in energy efficiency in communal areas where it's nobody's business but ours, then that business case for that has just become an awful lot sharper, given that those changes in costs and the impact that will have on the rest of our budgets. But that needs to be considered against a range of other investment needs, which will be in an executive report in December. Which will look at the whole asset management planning repairs, maintenance budgets, and how that relates to retrofitting and energy efficiency, starts to mainstream that strand of something that's not just a program over there where you spend 2 million on it. It becomes part and parcel of every investment decision you're making that looks at not just carbon but energy costs as well.
Thank you. Councillor Pavlovic.
Thank you. Well, while you're on that topic, and I don't know if we want Patrick up here, in the next report in the Financial Monitor, it says the HRA is forecast to be in deficit by around 2.3 million. And you then go on to say in this report that the costs are going to have to be picked up. You know, that deficit is going to have to be picked up by cuts somewhere else. Given that this situation isn't going to get any better anytime soon, and I think we're all recognising that, is how much worse are you forecasting, and what impact is that going to have on the HRA, and where are those cuts likely to come? Are they going to come in repairs? Are they going to come in staffing? Where are you going to make the cuts?
That's not the subject of this particular report, and I'm not in a position tonight to talk about
But you would be.
How we
But I think it's an important question. I think it's an important question to ask. The HRA is significantly in deficit, and it's going to have to be picked up by savings somewhere. And it's a question that I think we're all going to need to know. Council tenants, officers and members, somewhere further down the line.
Yeah, clearly the HRA is slightly separate from the general fund, but suffers from all the same inflationary increases, and you know, the issue we've been talking about here with rent arrears also impacts on it in terms of kind of cash flow and how much money you've got to be able to reinvest. The demands upon the HRA, I think, have probably never been greater, and some of the financial challenges it faces have never been greater. It is a very important question, and we've got a lot of officer time at the moment going into the analysis, projection and the consideration of options which will form part of the budget.
Well, I hope they do come to us perhaps before they get announced in the budget round, and at least that way we can understand what it is that we're going to be looking at. But I've got a second question, totally unrelated. Well, kind of not unrelated actually. Dennis, we've spoken before about the impact of people's energy bills going through the roof. They're also now faced with the pressures for their rent. Are we making any sort of assessment of individuals that are going into rent arrears because they're having to pay extra fees, whether it's because of damp or whether it's because of particular vulnerabilities within that family, that they've got to have a warm house, and they've got to prioritise the heating? We put less pressure on them about the rent because we recognise that most of their disposable income, which isn't disposable, but is going towards paying their energy bills.
Yes, and to a certain extent, that's always been the case. As I indicated earlier, we don't just go in and say, "I want my rent," and that's the extent of the discussion. It's a holistic approach to everybody. So I've asked for the teams to, well, I mean, we're at the point where ends just don't meet, full stop. So, you know, I will want to know the number, the trends, the cases that applies to, and where my teams can't fill the gaps and there is no solution obviously available. That will need flagging up with people like me, so I can come to people like you and say, what are we going to do about this? Now, I haven't had any cases flagged up so far. The teams are really quite effective at working with people to get them to the point where they're prioritising their debts. They're dealing with the priority debts. and then minimizing the outgoings and maximizing their income. But I can see over time that that might be the case. So essentially, what I'm saying is that we look at each family individually. It's not a one size fits all approach. Our staff, we encourage discretion within the actions that they do. We encourage them to be creative with the solutions that they try and achieve in working with people. And obviously, if they can see that families are failing and things are going in the wrong direction, then they will flag that up initially with the team leaders. But I've asked for any of the sort of wider trends to come to me. In addition to that, I've mentioned that we're making some changes to the housing management structure, which all of the councillors, and there will be some more general publicity around that. We're hoping to go live in the new year. We're waiting for the IT to be developed to support it. So we understand that the start of a tenancy is a really crucial part of the life of the overall tenancy in that customer journey. So we're hoping to build up relationships prior to people moving in through working with them in our temporary accommodation, getting them on as sound a financial footing as possible, making sure the property is as safe and as warm as possible, and that any issues are dealt with. And when all of those sorted out, sort of hand them over to the generic housing management officer. And equally, another role that will intervene when things aren't going so well later on in the tenancy, and giving those staff a bit more time to do that. Now, we don't have any more resources to do this. We just think it's a smarter way of working, given what we know about the people that we work alongside who live in our homes.
I mean, one thing that I did pick up on with Tracy, I think I remember bringing it up a few months ago, was if you're looking at cutting somebody's, putting an application into the court to cap somebody's electricity and gas, i.e. to turn it off because of rent arrears, that before that process takes place, the LACs, and we've talked about the LACs, go in and do an assessment and that holistic assessment, whether they're in rent arrears or not. And I think that actually is a model by which you can sort of not nip things in the bud, but you can make that initial assessment. Because what I really don't want to see, and I don't think anybody sat around the table or officers either, want to see people's gas being cut off during the winter months. Well, not at any time, but particularly during the winter months. And there needs to be some directive work goes on before the council consider putting an application in to cap somebody's utilities.
Yes, so that process existed pre-COVID. It's not perfect, or it wasn't perfect, and we've resurrected it again now that gas servicing proper has kicked in, and again with the enforcement elements of it as well. So yes, the process is there, and it is being developed as well, working with organisations like or teams like local area coordination, and the knowledge of housing management officers and where social care are involved, etc. So absolutely, all of that work goes on, but we do have a regulatory requirement where gas servicing hasn't taken place to do something about it, and we'd be in very big trouble if we didn't address those cases.
But we're not using that as a mechanism to recover rent. That's a different process. It's not related to rent recovery.
Thank you. I'll bring Councillor Craghill, and then I think we'll move on to the next agenda item. Councillor Craghill.
It was just a quick point, and really follows on from both what Michael and Dan just said in a way, perhaps. I'm keeping quiet mostly because I think I'm supposed to. I'm listening, but and there are no easy answers on this, I appreciate. But just thinking, your initial question was about people who particularly need to keep warm, maybe for health reasons, for a warm house, and presumably, as you were kind of indicating, there's potential for the HMO to think, well, have they maximised all the benefits they could get if there is a health reason? So you would pass, you know, as you talked about a bit earlier, the HMO would seek to pass on to someone else with some expertise, whether it's a LAC or another advisor, to see if they have actually drawn down all the benefits that they're entitled to, because that's what we're trying to do is maximise that sort of income.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Dennis?
Yeah, so again, examples of the documents I gave to you about, you know, making sure that there is a comprehensive approach to ensuring that people maximise their income. And I also included a link to the benefit calculators. There's 3 benefit calculators on the government's website, one of them being a better off calculator. So if you're already on benefits, it tells you whether you're on the best combination of help and benefits as well, which are really, really simple, useful tools to absolutely address that basic issue around income.
Thank you very much. Okay, members happy for us to, sorry, Councillor Cuthbertson. Yep.
Sorry, Chair, I've been very quiet up to now. Picking up the point you were making about advising people about benefits, is CAB involved in this directly through the council? I asked the question because in Haxby and Wigginton, we, the 2 villages, Town and Parish Council, both actually provide the services of CAB to anybody in the community who needs it, from the point of view of easing benefits or perhaps dealing with difficult debts.
So was a question around joint work with Citizens Advice York?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I said CAB.
Yeah.
I beg
No,
that dates me, doesn't it?
Yeah, so again, I think I've indicated in the paper that we're part of Advice York Network, which includes Citizens Advice York and a whole range of other organisations. Joseph Roundtree, you know, I could go on, and I think some of you have been to the Advice York meetings all the time. So there is a genuine network around advice, and we share knowledge. The forms that you see tend to come via the shared work of the Advice York network, and it means that we can tap into sort of wider knowledge and initiatives, for example, around digital inclusion, etc. So the answer is yes. Obviously, we could all of us do with more advice of that nature, but I think we're very good in York at maximising the knowledge of the help that is available and making sure that people get tapped into that as soon as possible. We all know that there are long waiting lists for people to be seen for assessments around their help, but yes, we work closely as a network. It's not just a one relationship. It's that whole range of help that's tapped into.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Dennis and Tracy, and I think the report does emphasise the important work that housing management officers do and will continue to do. And I know, I'm sure I speak for all councillors, that we we value and respect the work that they do, because we see quite a lot of it in directly or through residents. So thank you for everything that's being done. If we now move on to the urgent item, I don't know if you want to join us, Vicky. So this is so we don't have a paper for this item. This is an opportunity for officers to give us an update on how you're approaching the request from government for information on our approaches and authority to managing damp and mold in our properties. So over to you.
I'll just give an introduction and then invite Vicky to talk about the work that we've been doing. Following the tragic death of a young person in Rochdale, I think the issue of damp has had a light shone on it that previously has not been there in this country, but damp is not a new thing. and say from my own personal experience of living in my house, if you live in a cold, wet climate, damp is something that you have to live with, and every homeowner or tenant or landlord in the country has got to deal with damp. It is a part of our building regulations, how ventilation is built in. It's a part of how we work with our lifestyles to deal with damp. But it's quite a complicated issue as well, because there are building related issues to it. There's where you live, what the water table is doing, there's what kind of house construction you've got, that's how many people you've got living in the house, what your habits are, how you dry your clothes, whether you open the window when you're having a shower. There are so many facets to this, and it is kind of fraught with danger of being characterized as a lifestyle choice about creating damp, which I think for tenants, for residents and people living in their own homes, where you do your best to live your lifestyle to manage damp, and you still have mold. It's pretty frustrating to be given the just open the window advice. So our response to it needs to be as thoughtful as about the range of those issues as it possibly can be. We've had a known problem with damp in a number of our housing properties for some time now. 2016, I think we did a survey of damp in a particular range of properties that had standing water in the cavity underneath the flooring due to high water tables in that area. We live in a flat area that has got parts of which are reclaimed from bog. We have high water tables, we flood. So that for it is an issue, as a geographical issue for the city, is quite a big one. And that manifests itself in a number of our properties. Following on from that survey work in 2016, we put together a standing water programme to invest capital works to remedy those houses, to put solid floors in, insulate, and get rid of the damp. That has been going on since, I think, 2017, and the programme is a regular repairs and maintenance cycle that identifies the worst properties first and deals with those. During COVID, that programme was significantly hit for two reasons. Firstly, tenants were unwilling to allow us into their homes to do the works, and would have found it much more difficult to relocate whilst those very, very invasive works were undertaken. So we had a slowdown on the programme during the whole of that COVID period. When we came out of COVID, we've reported back to Scrutiny on a number of occasions about the difficulties we've had with restoring the contractor base and deploying our own resources effectively to deal with the backlog of repairs and maintenance that accrued during COVID lockdown. And that has further exacerbated the difficulties in rolling out the standing water programme. It has not been halted. However, some residents had to have the planned works cancelled because we could not actually find the resources to be able to deliver those works. That's what, when we had Hilary talking to us, those were the situations there. It's not that we decided to halt the programme, we simply could not actually meet the promises that we had made. That programme has been reprogrammed, and I'll ask Vicky to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing there. Clearly, with the cost of living issues and the energy, in particularly the energy price issues, the damp and mold issues become more prevalent in a cold weather scenario when you are not heating your houses, or they maybe are colder than they used to be. So we really do need to think about how those two things collide. And I'm really pleased that we picked up on that issue as part of the cost of living report, because I think it's a very, very important topic for us. I've also referred to the fact that we are putting a report to executive that should pull together all of our investment plans for repairs and maintenance, which include energy efficiency, which is a long-term solution to this, but they also seek to look at the damp and mold as one of the key issues with now repairs and maintenance, but not the only one. We know when Grenfell Towers burned down, then fire safety suddenly became a very public issue. That we can't lose sight of the other key health and safety issues that we've got to balance in the decisions we make about investments. So I just asked Vicky to try and give you some sense of the scale of the issues within and what we're doing to deal with them.
Thank you. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Vicky, that'd be great.
Yeah. I'm Vicky Japes. I'm the Head of Housing Strategy and Performance. I know, a poor substitute for Michael Jones, but he's on paternity leave, so you've got me, sorry. So just picking up on what Tracy was saying, so in 2016, we did a sort of fairly major survey, and that was when a lot of the properties that people think of as the standing water ones, the ones with literally, you know, visible water underneath floorboards, were identified. At that stage, about 600 properties were identified in the city. So since then, we've done major capital works on 569 properties. Now, that does not mean that 31 somehow disappeared off that list. It means that they've been picked up. They've been picked up in other ways. Some of them have been minor works and repair works, but we've done major capital works on 569. But other ones are continually being added to the list. So that's not the end of that programme. We've got 120 in total that we're now aware of that will need significant investigative and potentially significant investment in them. In effect, we're sort of operating two strands of work that would address damp and mould. So we've got the significant capital works where we would say there were structural issues with the properties, whether it's standing water or failed damp proof courses or major roof works or various things. That's in our capital team. We also have damp and mould issues that are picked up on a sort of regular repairs type phone calls that come in. We've done a little bit of digging. About 2% of the calls we get through for housing repairs would relate to damp, mould, cold, wet feeling walls or black patches, various things. We are, I'm sure you're all aware of the Open Door magazine that goes out. With that, in December's edition, we're sending a letter to all our tenants urging them to report. Just saying, report, tell us what you've got. We're specifically putting in there because there's lots of, as Tracy refers to, there's lots of sort of lifestyle advice around the healthy homes and healthy and sustainable homes team have got a very good leaflet on their web pages with good advice about managing and potentially preventing damp where you can do something about it. So our letter is saying often there are structural problems. Could be that you've got tiles missing on your roof. It could be that you've got faulty rainwater goods. It could be blocked gutters. There could be pointing missing and things. And all of these, obviously in your own home, you're not thinking, oh, that's a quick win to replace roof tiles. But if people can see them, they can report them, we can repair them, and we can deal with lots of the issues relatively quickly to help prevent some of those becoming, bigger and more sustained structural problems. So there's a range of things we're doing. Happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. Councillor Fitzpatrick.
Just a basic question, really. I grew up on a council estate in the 1960s, and we were always very worried when we knew something the council was going to come round and monitor. These visits used to take place periodically, and it was part of being a council tenant that you were. So I'm just concerned that we are maybe relying on tenants to report things when in actual fact, because they've got so many other things going on in their lives at the moment, reporting damp might not be something that they might do. It doesn't mean to say, if you look at the data, that they haven't got problems with damp. It's part and parcel. They're just deluged with all the problems that are going on. So is there any way that things are monitored? Have we got the capacity to do a check to be sure? We've said how much work the housing managers have got to do already, officers, not necessarily them, but just to go out as part of a general check, not for the tenants to be checked up on and told off, but kind of supported really in some respects.
I think that's a good point, and I think it's something that in the work I'm doing with building services at the moment, we've picked up on how important it is for us to be looking out for our stock, for the quality of our stock. So I think Den's team do a great job of reporting issues that tenants either report to them or that they come across when they're out and about. So we work very well with Den's team, and they do report issues where they come across them or where they're highlighted to them. The building services have area team leaders who go out and do a lot of the survey work. They bring issues back and report on them. We have all of our contractors. Some of these are very recent actions, but things like our roofing contractor, when they're up on scaffolding looking at roofs, they regularly tell us about other roofs. But all of our contractors are being asked to look for any causes of damp or damage to properties. And we're about to do a whole piece of work with all of our trade staff, so that basically when everyone is out, eyes and ears, and they can bring jobs back, they can log jobs from their handheld devices, so anyone can pick up on issues and log them. And again, which is why we're also saying to people, obviously, we're not saying it's your responsibility entirely, but we are saying, if you've got anything and you're even slightly worried about it, phone us and we can talk it through with you. So I get that not everyone is able to do that, and it's a combination of us doing all of those things. Our gas team, because we have a responsibility to do gas safety checks every year, our gas team are in almost all of our properties. We have some that are electric only, but almost all of our properties have gas, and they're going in once a year, and obviously they're quite experienced in terms of water circulation and and leaks and various things. They always do a wee check round inside properties at what they can see, obviously, only where they're actually going and into looking at round boilers and stuff, but they pick up on issues as well.
Dennis, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to I absolutely agree with what Vicky said, and just sort of give you a little bit more information on that. So obviously housing management officers are looking out for any issues with regard to properties as well. I suppose one of the things that's come out on the back of the tragedy is there is a general awareness raising around damp and mold issues, and we have a workforce that goes into the homes all of the time, and I can vouch that people are reporting things through, because I received some of that personally as well. You'll see in the arrears action plan from my paper that we have a long-term ambition to do tenancy and wellbeing visits, which are along the lines of the old style visitors. I think they were called lady visitors in York in the 60s, even though some of them were actually male. I remember some of the people that were involved in that service. We simply don't have the levels of staff to do it on that basis, and it was very intrusive for tenants as well. It was in a different era. The tenancy and well visits that we want to do is very heavily IT dependent, because we've had a couple of goes at it, and it's all you do. That's all you would do, because when you go and talk to people that you maybe haven't seen for quite a long time, you get engaged in a conversation about their tenancy, their home, and what's going on in their life as well. So we want to do it in a much more structured, constructive way, and it will be with a sort of profiled approach. So those people that we haven't seen for some time, those people who have not had a repair, those people who've had too many repairs, well, not too many repairs, but a lot of repairs, more than the average, and any other sort of sets of indicators like, repeated gas and no entry for gas servicing. So that's a long-term ambition, which we're gearing up to beyond the pilot, but we will need the IT to support that. And that should be another effective way of making sure that these things are picked up.
And empowering residents to report it or to ask the question about whether they should be concerned about it. Letter going out fairly soon, we'll try and do that. I'm really conscious of not trying to over alarm people. Really bad damp and mold is a very serious health problem. Having a few spots of black mold on your wall is not going to kill you. I've got black mold on my walls, and I know, and it's about taking it seriously yourself, so you clean it off and you deal with your own health risks, but then reporting it if it's being caused by something that's persistent and needs dealing with.
Did you want to come back? Yeah.
Yeah, just on that really, with letters going out, I do feel, maybe it's me as an English teacher, but I just feel sometimes, you know, a letter from the council, it can't be too wordy, really. It needs to be very specific, just bullet points, because if people are feeling fed up and depressed, anyway, another letter from the council, you know, it's just clear, succinct, to the point, and as positive as it can be, really, without feeling that they're being told off again for not having done something.
We're really conscious about not telling them off, but also letting them know what we're doing, but then giving them the power to do something about it themselves.
Yeah, make it user friendly a bit more.
I think it's encouraging to hear sort of kind of making every contact count in terms of, you know, I'm here to check insulation. Okay, there's no, you know, there might be a lack of roof insulation or insufficient roof insulation. That could be why hot air hits cold surface, you get damp. So that it's sort of joining the dots, and I suppose it's kind of empowering staff as well as tenants to say, well, I'm not here for that, but while I'm here, you know, and this, I suppose it's a cultural thing in terms of being able to do that, but I'm sure the new IT system and handheld devices, that all sounds fantastic, and things can happen through those mediums. Yes.
Just to finish off on that, there's a very good charity called Community Bees that we might all subscribe to as ward councillors, to come and help clear properties. And in talking to some of the people that do that, they kind of smiled, really, but it wasn't that funny. They said, we often see piles of unopened letters that have come from the council, really, you know, that they just think. So so there is a serious side to that as well, I suppose, really. It's just
trying to slip inside a magazine so there's some chance they might read it.
Yes.
Councillor Pavlovic next.
Yeah. Just to finish that point, you know, it's such a relief that you're talking about being proactive and reporting, because it wasn't 6 months ago that you know, I was writing in as a ward councillor about, you know, gutters that were pouring with water, and a team was going in to do something else and saying, sorry, that's not what I'm here for. So, you know, if there is going to be a cultural shift, it's welcome, but it's equally not before time. But just on Vicky's question, Vicky's point, so are you saying, Vicky, that there are currently, as far as we're aware, 120 properties that have been identified with significant damp and mold problems, and is that what submission's going to go into government?
Yes, based on the questions we've been asked about category 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Look, slightly odd categories, and we're having to unpick slightly what category 1, what's category 2. Sometimes you're not sure until you started to look into the property. So we're doing best estimates based on the information we've got from surveys, but they've been non-intrusive surveys, obviously. So sometimes we're kind of best guessing of whether about things are category 1 or 2. But yes, of the properties we know of that are waiting for work, we've got 120.
Right. So
that doesn't, I take the Councillor Fitzpatrick's point, that doesn't mean that all of the properties that need work have been that we're aware of or have been reported. But we're re-procuring, as Hilary was asking, we're re-procuring for the major structural works which are based around damp. So not calling it a standing water programme, because obviously there are other reasons for having significantly damp homes. But we're re-procuring that contract, and the current list that will go to that contractor, there's 13 properties to be done this financial year, and then the remaining 107 will go to the new contractor who will be appointed next year.
Right. And that's the point I think Councillor Webb was making. One, do we know how many, and can the ward councillors in particular be made aware of how many are in Belfarm, for example, or in each of our wards? How many of those are major structural repairs, and what the likely timeline is? Because what my worry is, you're now going on into an exercise, which I don't think is a wrong exercise, but you're going into an exercise of asking people to report additional faults, and we're already, and we've heard it month after month at these committee meetings, of the pressures that are in the maintenance teams to be able to do the existing work. And if you're going to find yourselves reporting things in and hearing that it's going to be, well, it might be a couple of years before we get round to it, you're going to create a cycle of negativity and loss of confidence in the council and its repair teams. I don't think it's the wrong thing to do. I'm just worried about the capacity that we've got to be able to actually then start to address it when you get all these reports coming in.
Yeah, I think I'm just reflecting on the letter that we got from Michael Gove and how zero tolerance it was for any damp and mould issues, and how zero money was attached to helping us to resolve it. We do have financial limitations, we've got resource limitations, and it has to take its place alongside other investment challenges, which are of equal importance. There's no magic wand on this one, and it'll be a worst first approach to it. But I think the kind of the culture shift that we've been talking about is starting to take place. I was really heartened actually by Hillary's comment when she spoke to the committee earlier about the example of a quick response to a problem. Really, a building that's had standing water done, and we've neglected to put a fan in the bathroom. You know, we need to think a bit more broadly around some of these things so that we deal with ventilation issues in properties that we just spent a lot of money on dealing with damp. So it's not going to be a quick journey. But we will provide the information that we have once we've got that ready for submission to government, so that ward councillors are aware of where they are and which tenants are experiencing that. We're also starting to have discussions about if it's going to be some time before your standing water is dealt with, what additional support do we need to put in there so that we can help people cope during that waiting period?
Because I mean, that can be something that ward councils can actually support you with. If we know what properties we're talking about, we can go in and we can offer support, and we can be that conduit, if you like, or you know, and if things are deteriorating, to flag that up. But if we don't know, then it's incredibly difficult, because the number of constituents that write to a councillor, any given councillor, we think might be a lot. But in actuality, it's a really, really small percentage of the residents.
If you followed the details or even looked beyond the headlines at the Rochdale case, the level of damp and mould in that property was horrendous, and the level of systemic failure to actually identify that and respond to it appropriately was probably the most concerning thing about that case. And that's why the all eyes approach has got. But
what they did say, and it's something that I've heard council officers saying, is oh, it's your lifestyle, and you brought it up. It's your lifestyle. Oh, you need to open your windows. Now, we've just had a conversation earlier on as to why people aren't going to open their windows in the middle of winter. But secondly, there's a whole cultural set of assumptions that are made there. And we do need to get away from making those lazy stereotypes that it's around people's behaviour as the reason why they've got damp and mould.
Was it a supplementary, Councillor Fitzpatrick? Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
I'd just like to bring Councillor Craghill in, really. Unfortunately, you missed Councillor Webb's public participation at the beginning. We're hearing all this excellent work that officers are trying to do. So as exec member, how are you best supporting the officers, do you think, yourself and the executive at the moment? I mean, for example, are you meeting regularly? Are you offering? What is your role in this? How are you supporting them in what they're trying to do?
Well, Councillor Fitzpatrick, I don't think I'm actually here today to answer.
No, but I'm
member, but I am quite happy to respond. Yes, we met earlier on today. We talked about this, and we do meet regularly, of course. I was the one who asked the question about what do we do to support people. I think part of going back a bit, reeling back a bit of what you were just saying, it's about prioritising, triaging, prioritising and communicating better with residents than, you know, we've prioritised this, or we know realistically it's not going to happen for a while, but in the meantime, we're going to try and do this and this and this to help you manage the situation. And what you said about communicating with ward councillors as well at the right time, I think that's all part of that response. So yeah, very much looking at that.
Yeah, we've been talking about this issue as it relates to everything else that I've talked about tonight. You know, when that case came up, you know, as an officer, you look at it and you think, right, where are we? Have we got that? Have we got that problem? And you know, the things that keep you awake at night, very, very high on the list. Yeah. And having looked at the work that we've done to explore this, I don't think that we're in that situation by any stretch of the imagination. Are we perfect? No. Do we have work to do? Yes. Could we do some of this a bit better? Yes, we can continue on the journey we're on. And I think if we were all to be honest with that, with you about where we feel particularly we could do better, it's around communicating with tenants about the progress of their issues. We don't know what we don't know, hence the kind of reach out to find out if there's something that we don't know about. Hopefully we won't find anything, but if we do, we'll be on it very quickly.
Councillor Vassey.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd like to take a slightly different tack. I mean, we've been hearing that about the role of behaviour and lifestyle. And this is about our response to government. And I would certainly think it would be a good thing for the City Council to be communicating with residents across the city as to how the particular circumstances we find ourselves in this year, which we may anticipate will go into future years with the fuel crisis, does have the potential to create particular problems for all of us. And I know lots of people, myself included, heating fewer rooms this year because the bills are so high. That would be happening right across our city. I think it would be hugely helpful if government could be persuaded to use its resources to produce a film for all local authorities that's 1 or 2 minutes long, that gives information to all of us across the country on issues such as, do you dry your clothes in a cold room? Do you dry them in a hot room? Do you open the window after you've had a bath? All those things that I know that isn't the cause of the serious damp problems that exist in particular homes. But I think this year, it would be of value to us all to have some understanding of the part that we have to play in protecting ourselves from a problem in the future by better understanding how to manage in homes that are no longer warm. For the Victorians, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. I grew up in, you know, my grandmother, there was no central heating. There were just 2 rooms with fireplaces in them. But we've got generations of people now who've lived in different homes. And I think there are skills and that we need to relearn. And I think government would usefully provide a resource that could be used for social media for all residents across the country. So that would be my advice to this. Can we add that government needs to help? It's not a big cost, but it's something government could do rather than each individual local authority trying to do it.
There you go. Microphone, please.
Thanks. Just sharing with me a social media post from our website on preventing condensation, damp and mold. I'm glad that's what you were sharing with me in the middle of the meeting. I thought it was a YouTube video. So that material does exist on our website.
And if government wants to provide materials as well, the more the better.
Can I just ask then that officers share that with all councillors directly so that all councillors are aware of it, so that we can use our social media to help promote that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thanks. It was just a very similar point, really, and I wanted to agree with the public speaker Hillary's comment about how, this is obviously not just a council tenant problem, and I know we have to respond formally in relation to what we're doing for council tenants, but the private renters, this really shouldn't be discriminated against from receiving any of that kind of information and advice. Could we put our own article, a very non-wordy, eye-catching article in the Our City, the next Our City, because it's topical?
We'll raise it with our comms colleagues. We are, of course, also we have statutory responsibilities for private rented sector quality. So we've had to make a different submission to government on from that role. Anthony Dean, who's the new head of that service, has responded back to government already, and we'll be working with the Landlords Association to help them understand how they maintain their assets and deal with this in their stocks. It's going to be as significant for them as it is for us.
Thank you. Any further question, Councillor Wells?
Could I just carry on with that point, Tracy? How do we get to know what's happening in private rented sector? Because the majority of people wouldn't think to go to the council. They would think to go to the landlord, and if the landlord didn't sort it out, they'd either move or put up with it.
Interesting question, because my brother's having this with his children in London, where they've just moved into a flat and it's ramped with damp and not knowing where to go to deal with it. I pointed him to Camden Council, so they'll be getting a call from him. But he's trying to deal with it with the landlord first, as we would encourage them to do. I know we only step in when the landlord is not taking action and the premises are substandard. So we've got a kind of statutory compliance role, but we also do that kind of encouragement and linking and signposting to information about how to do that. I'll ask Anthony to have a look at our website and see if that's clear to private tenants as well, that they've got that route of progress.
That'd be good. Indeed. Any further questions? No. Thank you very much for sharing that an update on ongoing piece of work, and thank you for
Can we get an update sometime in the new? Sorry, Chair. Could we get an update sometime in the new year, maybe February, March time, before we go into PERDA, about what's happening with the repairs and the standing water? Yeah. I thought a couple of months, 3 months should be enough time for you to have got an action plan together and some idea of how it's working. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So, okay, jump to pause, or should we carry on?
No, you carry on.
Okay. Patrick, can I invite you to join us at the table? So this is the Q2 finance and performance monitor. So over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm Patrick Looker. I'm Head of Service Finance at the Council, and housing is one of the areas that I support at the Council. So what you've got here is the second performance and finance monitor. It's based on data that took us up to the end of September this year, and it was reported through to executive on the 22nd of November. You've actually discussed a lot of the issues that are within this report effectively. So all the problems and the cost of living pressures that are facing our tenants are facing the council as well. So as part of the budget last year, members agreed to increase rent by 4%. So our revenues raised by 4% in terms of the rent, but our costs have been going up significantly greater than 4%. So our pay costs went up by in the region of 6-7%, which was greater than we were assuming at the time that we set the budget. Repairs costs have gone up by, materials are in the region of 10 to 12% increased cost of materials. Our subcontractors, sort of CPI in the region of 10%. Fuel costs have gone up. Utility costs, electricity 128%, our gas costs 400%. You've already heard this, but it's putting a significant pressure on the housing revenue account. So we are looking at an overspend of £2 million compared to the budget. It's worth saying, as fortunately Councillor Pavlovich has left the room, but he's saying the deficit on the HRA was 2.3 million. There was some carry forwards from expenditure that was assumed to be incurred last year. So we were actually, the long-term business plans assumed that we'd be making about a £2 million surplus on the HRA this year. So the fact that it's showing a 2.3 overspend is actually, we've turned away from the HRA being operationally profitable. This year it's making a slight deficit, and that is obviously unsustainable going forward, because the HRA has to effectively only receive its money from rents, and it needs to cover its expenditure from those rents and service charges. The other pressures that the HRA is facing this year is there is a shortfall on rents compared to budget. We've got a couple of significant sites where we have voids. There's Glen Lodge, where we're doing some significant work, or proposing to do some significant work in the not too distant future. Similarly, Bell Farm, where there's a number of properties that have got asbestos in the porches. We've highlighted these to members, and we're getting a plan to repair those and maintain them, but it's causing further pressures within rents in the short term. So that's the pressure for this year. There's obviously going to be pressures for next year, and that's going to be a decision that members are going to have to make in terms of the budget next year going forward, in terms of what we're doing with the increase in rents that we're able to do, where the government have allowed or capped local authorities to increase rents at 7%. Without that cap, we potentially would have been able to increase rents by 11%, but obviously you've got that, members have that difficulty in terms of what's affordable for the tenants, what's affordable for the revenue account. So what the report's saying is there's a number of pressures across the HRA which we can manage within a year, given we are in a relatively financially robust situation. We do have significant amount of reserves. We've also got significant amount of debt. We have to service that debt. Ultimately, we do have to repay some of that debt as well. So that's the financial side of it. The report also highlights the performance and the service delivery with the usual tables that we incorporate. Tracy, Dan here, who hopefully can support some of those performance issues, but we'll pass over to any questions you may have.
Members, any questions for Patrick or colleagues? Councillor Pavlovich.
Sorry, I missed the beginning bit, but it was illuminating. Well, a couple of questions. This HRA debt, and you've just made reference to it, it started in 2012 and we're only just starting to look at repaying it in 2023. Why the 11-year gap? And why start repaying it now when we're in the mess that we're in?
When we took the debt out in 2011, 2012, we borrowed £121 million, and our treasury management colleagues looked at how long each. We broke that 121 million into large chunks of debt that we borrowed from the PWLB, which all had differing maturity times, which all had different repayment times, depending on when the council was repaying other parts of its debt. So it was purely a timing issue as to when those amounts were taken out for and when we need to repay them. So the first one so happened that there's a 1.9 million requirement to repay in 23-24. I think it's 8.4 million the following year. At each point in time, we will determine whether that's repaid in full or we refinance and take out further borrowing at that particular point in time. The problem we've potentially got is that the rate of interest when we retake out that debt might be higher, it might be lower than what we took the debt out at that particular point in time. So all that will have to be factored into the.
Sorry, so is the debt payable from the general fund or is it payable from the HRA? And are you borrowing from the HRA to pay? If you were to refinance, would it be HRA borrowing that you were talking about?
This is HRA debt.
Yeah, so it's HRA debt and it's being paid out of.
And the interest is being serviced through the HRA, and if we were to, and we will repay it using the HRA balance. We've been building up the balances because we've been making bigger surpluses than we were making pre-2010 because we were then allowed to keep all the rents. So we were making and assuming through the business plans over all that time that there would be profits that would be set aside and would ultimately repay the debt. What's happened in the 10 years, 11 years since we took that debt, the government have changed the rules on 5 separate occasions now, limiting the amount of rent we could increase. So we had 4 years where we had to decrease rents by 1%, which put a very significant pressure on the HRA and totally changed a number of the assumptions within the business plan. And they're doing it again in 2022-23, where they're capping, sorry, 23-24, where they're capping the rent at 7%. I'm not saying members would have made a different decision in terms of what they're going to charge or whether they will agree to charge 7%. That is ultimately one of the decisions that you'll be making. But it's just going to show that the government have changed the rules in terms of a decision that was made when they told us take £121 million of debt.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I've just got one more question.
Yeah.
I'll shut me out. In paragraph 10, you say that the number of voids has decreased from 140 to 110 in October. Yeah. And then further along in a different paragraph, and I'm just trying to find it, you say that the voids are 79 at the end of September. So I'm just wondering, where's that disparity come from? What is the actual void figure?
Can I invite Vicky back to the table, please? The Queen of Voids.
Yes. Well, that'll
Already
teach
thought
you.
you had done. You
Did you hear the question
I didn't hear the question, no.
You didn't.
again?
Right. So in paragraph 10, it's
I think it's mine. It's ringing in my hearing aids.
that's somebody ringing you to try to get you out of this question.
Apologies.
So there's basically, Vicky, there's 2 figures for voids. One says it's 110 and the other one says it's 79. Which is it?
Is there any context on those figures?
the 179 will be at the end of September. So I don't know whether which paragraph is the additional figure in?
Paragraph 25. Well done. Paragraph 25. The total number of void properties at the end of September 2022 was 89. Yeah.
Yeah.
In paragraph 10, it says the number of voids was 110, increased from 140 to 110 in October. So there's two completely different figures. One's really quite high, and the other one's high but not that high.
It's also out of date because it's now December and we've got
Yeah,
a
yeah,
further
I
reduction
get it,
since
but
then.
given that
Would-
we're looking at these,
Yeah.
given that we're looking at
Would you like
quarter
us to
out
give
again.
you a table of the void numbers by month that's current that we're tracking to now? I don't think we can explain the disparity in the report without doing a bit of digging. General comments on the voids is that they are incredibly hard to get down quickly. It's a real steady progress. We've got new teams, a dedicated management to the voids process, and teams dedicated to doing the surveying work and the commissioning of the work, and that's made a real difference to the speed with which we can respond. But the extent of the backlog is proving quite difficult to kind of to grind through. So we need to keep bearing down on it to make sure that we make that further progress, and we'll come back to with clear figures about what the voids are.
Cheers.
Can I just add that it's not that the numbers are, it's not that those two numbers that we've done something wrong. They will be reporting two slightly different figures. I just can't give you the detail of exactly what those are, but we have properties that are unlettable because they're waiting for work, for example. So in terms of the legislative voids figure, we are not to include them. So some of the properties, for example, ones in Glen Lodge that are waiting for significant work that is part of a capital programme.
Paragraph 10, Vicky, it says numbers. Sorry. In paragraph 10, Vicky, it says numbers outside of those categories. So it specifically mentions Glen Lodge and Bell Farm. So no, this is 110 outside of that category. And then in 89, it says in 25, it says it's 89.
And that was the month earlier.
So
I'll have to come back with you with some more detail.
Tracy's offered a sort of tabular figures in tabular form with I think a clarification indication of what those numbers do and do not include in terms of, do they include the unlettable properties?
I don't think they do.
Well, that's information we've been offered. So I think that will help.
Either there's an explanation or one of them's wrong.
Okay.
Both of them are wrong. Can't tell you.
Councillor Vassie.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. Yeah, I just have a question relating to the subjects we were covering in the previous agenda item, and wondered, Patrick, if you felt that we heard in paragraph 27 of item 5, I think it was, that gas costs in Barstow House communal areas had gone from £288 to £2,000. And I just wondered if you felt there is now a better case or a case for borrowing to invest, notwithstanding all the things we're talking about here with the HRA, to invest in improving energy efficiency in those kind of examples like communal areas, given that the equation in terms of payback period has changed dramatically, and whether you think that that is a permanent shift, 9 times multiplication in energy, whether you think that'll drift down but not hugely, but to get a sense of what the council's thinking about what this moment in time implies to our investment strategy in energy efficiency.
I think some of the payback questions, I mean, not to take Barstow House as the example, because it's relatively new and I doubt if it's particularly energy inefficient. But for those investment decisions where the investment responsibility lies with the landlord, but the benefit in terms of energy costs transfers to the resident, and that's the case in a lot of our council housing. And for some of our ILCs where we cannot at the moment recover full cost, we'd need to look at on a case-by-case basis to see whether as an investor say decision it made sense to the council and we would generate enough revenue saving to be able to repay the borrowing, and then it fits within the overall borrowing caps and all of the big questions that Patrick's just going to run through. So it's not a simple one.
No, Trish, absolutely right. But it's fair to say that the higher the cost of energy, the likelihood is that the business case will look better and the payback will be a shorter period of time, depending on the levels of savings of the energy that's being made. That's just a factor of increasing prices to some extent. So to save £50 on your energy bill previously would have required quite a significant investment, whereas a £50 saving will potentially require a much smaller investment now.
Briefly, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, just to make sense of it, it's because we've been hearing earlier on that while those costs are usually passed on to the tenants, we're in a situation where they can't be passed on to the tenants because the council recognises that the increase is so large. So it was to really get a sense of, because we are carrying that burden of extra energy cost, at what point we make the calculation that this is a long-term trend and therefore can influence the decisions we make on improving energy efficiency.
What we do really need to do is look at each of the individual sites. We need to look at how we're operating the sites. So we need to look at what sort of energy efficiency measures we potentially can be using, doing all the things that residents are doing at home. If you're keeping an eye on your thermostat, are we reducing the levels down? Are we dropping it down to the levels that we should be doing, or are we still operating them at the levels that historically we have been? That's something which we need to do from a general efficiency perspective. We also need to look at each individual centre as to what proportion of the charges we are passing on to residents. Some of them, but a lot of the calculations were done based on bills that were coming in last financial year. We now need to be looking at the actual usage, the actual cost of those schemes, and what is a fair charge for our residents. We can't be increasing them overly significant, but they need to be paying a fair share of the cost as well. So we need to be looking at those on a case-by-case basis, really.
Thank you. Councillor Pavlovic, did you have a final question?
Sorry, just to go back to the issue about the voids. I think it says in the report that the impact of the voids and the points that Tracy made about the difficulties in turning these round is costing us about £500,000, which is £500,000 of rent that the HRA isn't getting in. And I genuinely don't know the answer to this, so I really do like to know. Is there a bespoke voids team, or is void turnaround part of the generic repairs and maintenance team?
Vicky?
Yes, there's a bespoke voids team. There is some flexibility between teams. In the last few weeks, we've some trades teams staff have been moved from repairs into the voids because there's been a particular problem with a backlog of joinery work. So yes, there's a team that specifically work in voids. We've got people who do surveys of what work needs done. We've got people who do clean out properties, and then we've got some trade staff that are specifically in the voids team. There is a level of flexibility. I think we're now in a place with voids where we're turning round slightly more than are coming in. So it's improving slowly, but because there is a team, they have been recruited because there is an amount of work we expect. And because of we are managing the amount of work that is turning over. The challenge that people are working on is the backlog in effect. And so we've had some real peaks in void turnaround. We've had obviously, sickness and all these other things. And we're now at a place where we're turning around 1 or 2 more a week than are coming in, but we're not catching up as fast as we would like to be, and we are finding ways to address that.
And sorry, it's just to explore that a little bit with you, Vicky, if that's okay. Given the consequences of only turning around 1 or 2 more, and we've either got 110 or 89 of them, you're talking about a considerable period of time to clear the backlog. Would it not make sense to take the short-term financial hit to employ more contractors, subcontractors on temporary contracts to turn these properties round, to get them re-let, than to say, well, it'll take as long as it takes because we've got a finite resourcing? I suppose that's an issue for both you and Patrick, but it strikes me as it actually makes financial sense to take the short-term pain for the longer-term benefit.
There's sort of a number of answers. We've made the case to get to be able to employ additional temporary trade staff. We've struggled to recruit. Obviously, issues that I'm sure you're hearing in most committees you're going to. So just to make the team itself a bit bigger, we've struggled to recruit. We're still working on it. We've got an open advert for that. And then once you start to look at contractors to do those houses, we haven't quite got to a place where we've got a specification to be going out to contracts to get people to do the houses, because we're still having to survey them first. And sometimes it's about managing those contracts. But yes, we're about at the place where we're sharing possible solutions, and we know it's quite desperate. We're doing a piece of work with building services around all sorts of efficiencies, and we are at the very least at the moment moving people around to where the peaks of work are in their trade.
Thank you very much. Okay, I can't see any more hands, and at 20 to 8. Thank you, members. Thank you, officers, for your time and contributions this evening. We've done urgent business, so we don't need to do that. We've got work plan. We've got in the schedule, we've got one more public meeting in this cycle. There's a possibility we may have a meeting in January. I don't know whether that will be a public meeting or a forum meeting to talk about Safer York Partnership refreshed strategy, which it would be nice for us to have some input into. And I think there's a willingness to engage with us, and obviously we would want to engage with that, but I'll keep members informed. And who knows what we'll have to talk about in March. There might be new issues or new opportunities or new crises, but we'll see. But we'll make sure.
That update, haven't we?
Yeah, so we've the update on the damp and mold, sort of broader damp and mold issue. Okay. Yes, Councillor Massey.
You're talking about,
Need to turn your microphone on.
talking about March or January. We've all been exercised in the past few months about the potential changes with the fire service and whatever, and we've not heard anything at this committee for, I think, for a year on fire safety and a report. So I was just wondering if it might be an opportunity at the start of next year to get a report, to have some context on fire safety in York, given the potential changes?
No, in general, from a.
In general, sorry, in general, yes.
Yeah.
We get.
Yeah, I mean, as a moment, if we have a discussion in January on community safety strategy, if we can get the fire service, if we can tag that onto that, that will be helpful. No, you're right, because we haven't really haven't seen or heard from them or the police for that matter, for quite a while. Yeah.
I think probably we'd need an update on the resettlement process and rough sleeping and homelessness, because it's been a while. It will have been 6 months since we last looked at that.
So I'll look back at winter.
Yeah, look back at what happened over the winter, how things worked, and yeah, that will be helpful, I think.
Super. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.